My name is Nadine, and at 31 I had built something I was genuinely proud of. A CPA designation I'd earned entirely on my own, a small financial advisory practice in Kitchener that was growing faster than my original projections, and a condo I'd paid down ahead of schedule. None of it felt like enough. On the afternoon, my brother stood 3 feet away while his fiancée looked me in the eye and said, quietly enough to be polite, loudly enough that everyone on the dock heard it, "This one's just for the real Caldwells." The photographer had her camera raised. Everyone around me went still. My father developed a sudden intense interest in the far end of the dock. My mother found something absorbing in the hem of her cardigan. My brother gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug, the shrug of a man who had decided, sometime before this moment, that this was not his problem to solve. I stepped back from the group. I heard myself say something about needing a refill. I walked to the end of the porch and stood there with my back to everyone, until I felt steady enough to turn around. Nobody came to find me. Before I tell you the rest of it, I want to ask something first. If you've ever spent years trying to earn your place in a family that was supposed to be yours by default, leave a comment. Tell me where you're listening from tonight. Because what happened after that dock is going to resonate with some of you in a way that I think goes bone deep. I grew up the middle child in a Cambridge, Ontario household that ran on a very particular logic. My father owned Caldwell Contracting, a residential construction company that his own father had started in the 70s. By the time I was born, it was doing well. Crews working across Waterloo region, a reputation for solid framing work, a client list my father kept in a leather binder that sat on the same shelf my entire childhood. The company was the center of gravity in our house. It shaped the schedule, the moods, the dinner conversation. It was, in every meaningful way, the fourth member of our family. My brother was 4 years older than me, and had understood since childhood that the company was his inheritance. Not stated cruelly. Just understood, the way certain things in certain families simply are. My father took him to job sites on Saturday mornings, let him sit in on client estimates in high school, co-signed his first truck loan at 22 without a second conversation about it. When my brother moved into his own apartment, my father covered first and last. When my brother wanted to attend a 6-week trade management course in Hamilton, my father paid the tuition in full and threw in the gas money. None of that was available to me because, as my father explained the one time I asked directly, the trades were a different world for women and he was protecting me from it. He said it kindly. He meant it kindly. That's the part that made it hardest to argue with. My younger sister arrived when I was 7. She was warm and cheerful and entirely uncomplicated in the way youngest children sometimes get to be, and she was loved with the uncomplicated ease that warmth tends to attract. I was described in those years with words like responsible, capable, independent, words that sounded like compliments until I understood they meant something closer to, "This one can handle herself, so we'll let her." I handled myself. I got into Wilfrid Laurier on a partial scholarship and covered the rest working 2 jobs, one at the campus library shelving textbooks on weeknights, one waitressing at a pub on King Street on weekends. I graduated in 4 years. I sat the CPA exams on my first attempt. I found a position at a mid-size firm in Kitchener and spent 5 years there, learning every corner of corporate and personal tax work, before going independent at 29. The only time I asked my father for money was during second year, when tuition renewal left a gap of $460 between what I had saved and what the registrar needed. I remember that number exactly because of what happened next. I sat across from him at the kitchen table on a Sunday evening and explained the shortfall. He frowned at the table for a moment. Then he told me things were tight with the business that quarter. He said he was sorry. I said I understood. I picked up an extra shift that week. I covered the gap myself. Years later, when I was the one doing the company's books, I found out that particular quarter had been one of their stronger ones. I'm not telling you this to cast my father as a villain. He isn't one, exactly. He had a model of how a family was supposed to work, who was supposed to need what and from whom, and I simply didn't fit it. So I made myself not need anything at all. I got very good at it. By my late 20s, the practice was pulling in enough that I was able to start actually saving. I had 12 regular clients, 2 part-time staff, and a lease on a proper office in a building near downtown Kitchener with a reception desk and a window that got afternoon light. What I didn't talk about, even to my closest friend, was what I was simultaneously doing with the money I made. The first time my father asked me for help, I was 26. The contracting company was waiting on a delayed payment from a general contractor in Guelph, and he needed to cover 2 weeks of payroll while the invoice sat outstanding. Could I bridge it? Short term, he said. Of course. I transferred $85,000 from my business account. I drafted a repayment agreement myself, the kind I'd have done for any client, with a schedule and a rate and signatures on both pages. He made 3 payments in the first year, and then stopped, and every time I brought it up gently, he said he was working on it. My mother needed extensive dental work the following spring, crowns and a root canal that OHIP didn't cover, because Ontario's public health plan doesn't cover dental for adults over 17. $22,000. I paid the clinic directly and told my mother not to worry about it. My brother tried his hand at 2 separate business ventures in those years. First, a flooring franchise arrangement that folded after 14 months. Then, a renovation subcontracting outfit he'd started with a friend, which burned through its initial capital inside 2 years. I lent him $30,000 the first time, $40,000 the second. He paid back a total of $8,000 between both, in transfers that seemed to arrive right after I'd sent a gentle reminder and then went quiet again. And then, there was the cottage. The family had purchased a property on a lake north of Bracebridge, in Muskoka, when I was in my early 20s. It was framed to me as a family investment, something everyone would benefit from, summers and long weekends, the kind of place you'd eventually pass down. I was asked to contribute to the shared mortgage because it made financial sense to have 3 parties on the title. I agreed. I started paying my share. For 5 years I paid it faithfully. Nearly $58,000 in total, for a property I visited perhaps once a summer, and always slept in the smallest bedroom, the one with the window that didn't open all the way. I never added it all up. I was afraid of what the number would look like. The engagement party was held at the cottage in late August. The Muskoka air was the kind that only exists at the end of summer. Warm enough to be comfortable in a cardigan, cool enough when the breeze came off the water that you were glad you'd brought it. The lake was that deep green blue. It turns when the season is winding down. And I understood for the first time, that afternoon, why people arrange their whole lives around having access to a view like that. My brother's fiancée had organized the party with the kind of precision that suggested the Instagram documentation had been planned before the guest list. There were string lights strung from the porch rail down to the dock, a grazing board on the picnic table, a photographer hired for 2 hours. Everything looked effortless in the way that things only look when someone has worked very hard to make them appear that way. I arrived with a bottle of wine and a card with a genuine message inside because whatever I privately felt, I loved my brother and I wanted his engagement to be a good day. I said hello to cousins I hadn't seen in over a year. I ate too many of my aunt's butter tarts. I stood in the lake up to my knees for 20 minutes with my young niece, while she explained her theory about why fish don't get cold, and that 20 minutes was the best part of the whole afternoon. Then the photographer gathered everyone toward the dock for the family portrait. I walked over. I was standing between my mother and my aunt, close enough to the group that the photographer had already glanced at me and adjusted her framing, when my brother's fiancée appeared at my elbow. Her smile was the kind that looks effortless when it has been rehearsed enough times. "Oh, this round is just the immediate family," she said lightly, conversationally. "The way you'd say the soup was getting cold. The blood Caldwells, you know. We want to keep it intimate before we open it up." I turned to look at her. She held the smile, she didn't blink. I looked at my father. He had found something very interesting at the far end of the dock, and was studying it with great focus. I looked at my brother. The shrug was almost imperceptible, the shrug of a man who had decided this was not his to navigate. My mother's face had gone a particular color. I've known that color my whole life. It's the one she gets when she knows something is wrong, and has committed to surviving it by going somewhere else inside herself. "Of course," I said. My voice came out steady. I stepped back from the group. I said something about wanting to get a drink and walked to the end of the porch. Nobody came after me. I could hear the photographer counting down. I could hear laughter, and the sound of feet on the dock boards, and then, the click of the shutter, and then everyone relaxing into the warmth of having done the thing they came to do. I drove home 2 hours later with the radio on, and nothing worth keeping in my head. I made it to my front hallway before I sat down on the floor with my back against the door, and stayed there in the dark for a while. Not crying exactly, just sitting very still with 25 years of quiet accumulating all around me. My closest friend has known me since first year at Laurier. She has a gift for listening that involves letting you talk until you genuinely run out of things to say, and then asking the one question you didn't want to hear. I called her the next morning and told her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Nadine, how much have you actually given them over the years?" I said I wasn't sure of the exact number. "Find out," she said. So I did. That evening I sat at my kitchen table with my own financial records, something I had never done for myself, which is, given what I do professionally, the most embarrassing detail in this entire story. I pulled 5 years of transfers and payments and mortgage statements, and totaled them up methodically, the way I'd do it for any client. $263,000. I looked at that number for a long time, then I made a cup of tea I didn't drink and looked at it some more. $263,000. To a family that had just asked me to step out of the frame. 5 days after the party, my father called. His voice was warm in the specific way it gets when he's working towards something, casual, unhurried, as though we spoke every week, which we didn't. He said he was calling about a business matter. The company needed to renew its operating line of credit at TD, $120,000, the same branch he'd used for 30 years. The account manager had flagged his own credit profile as stretched from the previous renewal cycle. He needed a cosigner. Someone with a clean score and documented income. He said the word naturally before he said my name. Naturally. Nadine. I asked him to hold for a moment. I went and found the message my brother's fiancée had sent to the family group chat after the party. She'd posted the portrait photos. All of them beautifully lit, everyone smiling, the lake soft and golden in the background, with a caption that read, "So grateful for this beautiful Caldwell family. Blood really is everything." I screenshotted it. I went back to the call. "I'd love to help," I said, "but I just ran it by my own advisor, and apparently co-signers on business credit lines need to be documented family members. Given Saturday's photo session, I'm not sure I qualify anymore. Must be that Caldwell blood policy." Silence. Then, "That is not what that was." "I know exactly what it was," I said. "I'm sending you the screenshot so we're looking at the same source material." I sent it. I told him I had a client call starting in 10 minutes and I ended the call. I turned my phone face down on the desk. I sat there for a moment, then I opened my laptop and started drafting a letter. By the time my father and my brother arrived at my condo 3 nights later, I had already spoken with my lawyer and sent a formal document to both of them. A summary of every outstanding amount, with the original repayment agreements attached, the transfer records itemized, and a formal 30-day notice that I was removing myself from the cottage mortgage, effective the first of the following month. They came together. That told me it had been planned. My father led with his conciliatory voice. My brother had his jaw set in the way he does when he's decided in advance that he's the reasonable one in the room. My father said I had misunderstood what happened on the dock at the cottage, that my brother's fiancée had only meant that the first set of photos was for a specific grouping, and that I would of course have been included later. I told him I was a CPA, understanding documentation and stated intent is literally what I'm licensed to do. My brother said she hadn't meant it the way it came across. I asked him to explain, then, what way she had meant it, when she told me, in front of everyone on that dock, that the photograph was for blood Caldwells only, and I was asked to step back, what alternate interpretation was available to me. He didn't answer that. My father shifted. The business was under serious pressure, he said. Decisions he'd made in the last few years hadn't played out the way he'd planned. The line of credit was the only thing keeping the payroll stable. If it didn't get renewed, he might have to let people go. Good people who'd worked for him for years and had families of their own. I told him I was sorry to hear that. I meant it. He said, "I need your help, Nadine." I said, "I know. You've needed it for a while. $263,000 worth, to be specific, with signed agreements that haven't been honored and a mortgage I've been paying on a property that apparently belongs to the real Caldwells." My brother said the money was different. Family helped each other out. That was obligation. I asked him to explain the distinction to me, between family obligation when it ran in my direction, and family membership when it ran in his. I said I was genuinely curious how those two things coexisted in his understanding of how this worked. He didn't have an answer for that. My father looked tired, in a way that almost moved me. He's getting older, and I love him in the complicated way you love someone who failed you without meaning to. Almost. "What do you want from us?" he said. I told him I wanted the repayment terms in the existing agreements to be honored, starting in 30 days exactly as written. I wanted my name off the cottage mortgage by the 1st of next month, and I wanted his fiancée to understand, clearly and without room for alternate interpretations, that what happened on that dock was not a template for how I would be spoken to going forward. Beyond that, I told him I didn't want anything from any of them. That was the whole point. I was finished wanting things from people who had decided what I was worth, and arranged everything else accordingly. My father said family didn't just give up on each other when things got hard. I said, "I agree with that completely. I've been practicing that principle for 31 years. It's interesting that we finally agree." They didn't say much after that. My father pointed toward the door. My brother followed. I closed it behind them and stood in my kitchen, and ran the cold tap and drank a glass of water standing at the sink, because I didn't know what else to do with myself. The weeks that followed were strange in the particular way. Silence is strange after a sustained noise. You notice its shape. You find yourself listening for the thing that isn't there anymore. Extended family members reached out, some with genuine concern and some clearly working from a heavily edited version of events. A few of them were warm, a couple weren't. My cousin who lives out in BC, someone I'd always genuinely liked and who had long since put comfortable distance between herself and the family's main orbit, called me within the week and said, "I heard what happened at the cottage. That was wrong, and everyone standing on that dock knows it." She said it plainly without preamble. It mattered more than I'd have predicted. My mother called every few days. We talked around the edges of things carefully for a while. Then one evening she said quietly, without warming up to it, "I should have said something when I was standing right there. I knew that the moment I didn't." It was the most straightforward thing she had ever apologized to me for. It was the only apology from any of them that felt fully true. I didn't disappear from the family entirely. I found the version of those relationships I could sustain. Lunches with my mother every few weeks, the occasional holiday, a careful and deliberate recalibration of what I was willing to give and what I needed to hold back for myself. Some family members fell away. Some stayed. The ones who stayed, I noticed, were the ones who had always actually looked at me when I was in the room. My father made 2 payments on the outstanding loan in the months that followed. My brother made none. I forwarded the agreements to my lawyer and asked her to issue a formal demand letter, not because I expected the money to come, but because I needed the record to exist somewhere outside my own memory. I needed documentation that didn't depend on anyone else's account of events. The cottage sold in the spring. I was informed via group text after the fact. I had already moved my share of the mortgage savings into a TFSA and was watching it grow. My practice kept expanding through all of it. I took on a business partner in the fall, someone I'd known since my firm days, sharper than most and completely intolerant of wasted time, which suited me perfectly. We moved into a proper shared office near downtown Kitchener, with a reception area, and a fern neither of us has managed to kill yet, which we consider a reasonable achievement. I also started seeing a therapist that October, which I had told myself for years I didn't need. In our 3rd session, she said something that I've turned over many times since. She said the loneliest thing isn't being alone. It's being present in a room full of people who have all quietly agreed to look past you. I had lived in that room for a long time. I didn't have to anymore. My friend had said something similar the morning after I told up those numbers. She'd said, "You've been performing for an audience that wasn't watching." I didn't know how true that was until I stopped performing and noticed that the audience didn't actually react to the silence. They just redirected to the next thing available. This past spring I rented a place for a long weekend on a lake near Haliburton. Different water, different property, nothing connected to the Muskoka cottage or anything attached to it. I invited the people who had actually shown up for me. My business partner and her husband. My closest friend, my BC cousin, who drove out for the weekend and stayed an extra day because she said she didn't want to leave yet, which is one of the nicest things anyone has said to me in recent memory. My mother came for the Saturday, and we sat on the dock in the late afternoon without talking very much, and it was the most comfortable silence we'd had together in years. We cooked too much food and ate all of it anyway. We played cards badly and with great commitment until well past midnight. There was no photographer, no portrait, no one keeping track of who belonged in the frame. I sat on the dock early Sunday morning with a coffee and watched the mist lift off the water, and I thought about how long I had spent trying to fit into something that had never actually been sized for me. I don't have a tidy resolution to offer you. My father and I speak on occasion, my brother and I don't. His fiancée never apologized, and at some point I stopped keeping a space open for it. The contracting company found a different co-signer through one of my father's old industry contacts, and as far as I know, payroll kept running. I'm genuinely glad people kept their jobs. I mean that without any edge in it. What I have, instead of a resolution, is harder to name but easier to live in. It's the absence of dread on Sunday evenings. It's knowing where every dollar I've earned has actually gone, and why, with no quiet shame underneath the knowing. It's a life that doesn't have a hollow center I've been trying not to look at. I've learned that belonging isn't something you can manufacture by giving more. You can spend an enormous amount of money, of time, of effort, of yourself, trying to prove you're worth a place at the table. And the thing is, the people who require that proof have already made up their minds. The proving never ends. There is always a new condition, a new test, a new photograph you weren't included in. You are allowed to stop proving. If you're somewhere tonight where you keep trying to earn what should have been freely given, in your family, in any relationship, anywhere, I want to say this as plainly as I can. Setting a limit isn't the same as giving up. Walking away from the version of yourself that kept shrinking to fit is not abandonment. It is, I think, the most necessary thing some of us will ever do. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Tell me if you've ever had to decide that your own peace mattered more than someone's approval. I read every one of them. Whatever you're carrying tonight, you are not carrying it alone.